Number 8. Luca Parmitano. Did you know it was possible to drown in space? Yes, really. It's a far-out idea, but believe us, it can happen. The unfortunate individual who found this out by experience was Luca Parmitano, an Italian astronaut working on the International Space Station, or ISS, in 2013. It later emerged that the filters in his suit were contaminated, becoming blocked and creating a true nightmare scenario. Not that Parmitano knew at the time. His day was supposed to be spent doing a spacewalk, part of what's called an extravehicular activity. However, this time was cut drastically short when his helmet began filling with the wet stuff. The really crazy and scary thing was, this was happening beyond Earth's atmosphere, meaning the top half of the helmet filled first. Weird, huh? Imagine how you'd feel being in space, which is a precarious enough situation in the first place, and then water starts coming at you from an upside-down direction. While it didn't manage to block his airways, his ears and eyes were compromised. Also, he had another major issue. Was the fluid going to short out his comms? The water level increased over approximately 20 minutes. Parmitano needed to get back to base, and fast. Only trouble was, he was lacking vision and sunlight. In a terrible coincidence, the big ball of light decided to say goodnight. The stricken astronaut then had to feel his way back to the airlock. On top of this, he had to wait in the airlock for assistance as depressurization took place. By this stage, he couldn't hear what people were saying to him. Someone squeezing his hand was the only clue that help was coming. Potential tragedy was luckily avoided. Parmitano's brush with danger shows how space exploration can be treacherous in totally unexpected ways. Number 7. Mere eye injury. Speaking of the unexpected, space accidents aren't always super dramatic. The smallest things can create potentially major problems. Things explode and people get stranded, sure. But more commonplace stuff also happens. The very fact you're up in space is dangerous in itself. Even if a small medical issue crops up, you can't exactly take a trip to the doctor or call an ambulance, right? This story focuses on Norman Thagard, an American astronaut on board the Mir space station during the mid-1990s. His routine workout turned into a calamitous curveball. Perhaps embarrassingly, an elastic exercise band broke as he was using it to perform deep knee bends. This being space, it went straight up and belted him in one right eye. All sounds pretty comical, yet he couldn't put it down to bad luck and move on. You see, after the accident, Thagard realized his eye was hurting noticeably. Also, he was becoming light sensitive. Could he have done himself a proper injury through a simple workout? Eye drops were prescribed, and after a while he could get back to business as usual. It must have been concerning though. There aren't many home comforts up there in space. If a serious issue had developed, what would have happened? This seemingly minor accident went to a potentially major one and back again. One thing's for sure, Thagard must have exercised more carefully from that point, right? Number 6. Soyuz One Parachute. The Soyuz One tragedy is a shocking case of how spaceflight can go wrong at the last minute. Soyuz's pilot was Colonel Vladimir Komarov, who'd earned the honor of being the first Soviet to venture into space a second time. The orbiting mission didn't go smoothly, according to reports. A solar panel didn't open, leading to power issues. Plus, there were additional system problems. When it came time to return to Earth, Soyuz One looked as if it would perform re-entry without a hitch. Then, disaster struck. The drogue parachute reportedly opened fine. This chute was used to slow the vehicle down initially. Sadly, the second parachute didn't open. Then a backup chute got caught up in the drogue chute. According to reports, Soyuz One fell a distance of 4.5 miles. Colonel Komarov died in the crash. He became the first person to lose their life in spaceflight. An exact reason why the main parachute failed hasn't been established. Some commentators highlight the differences between the Russian approach and the American approach to the 20th century space race. The then USSR believed the USA was compromising certain safety issues, though ultimately, tragedies such as that which befell Soyuz One show that accidents can happen at any stage of the process. Number 5. Apollo-Soyuz gas leak. Our next choice sees Americans and Russians join forces. Yes, unlikely as it may seem, this actually happened, though it was an endeavor that almost ended in disaster for the US. The meeting of an American and Soviet craft in space in the mid-1970s was a truly momentous occasion. Remember that this was taking place against the backdrop of the Cold War, which still had a lot of years to run. An Apollo vehicle hooked up to a Soyuz capsule. The doors opened and the respective crews shook hands, a moment that was broadcast on TV. Once occupying each other's space, the men went about working together on various important experiments. In the spirit of cooperation, the Americans assisted their Russian counterparts with photographing a solar corona, or outer plasma layer of the sun. The Apollo craft handily eclipsed the sun for their new friends. Kinda strange to think of this happening with all the tensions on the planet below, right? So it all went smoothly, and the Apollo team headed back to Earth, which is where things went badly wrong. A wrongly positioned switch led to nitrogen tetroxide entering the cabin. The chemical almost reached fatal levels, and the crew were 24,000 feet from landing when the situation broke out. Worryingly, the crew felt their faces and lungs burning from the effects. One of them even lost consciousness. Oxygen masks were on standby, but even so, it must have been really scary. They made it down and were rushed to a hospital. X-rays revealed edema or fluid built up in their lungs, not to mention pneumonia. After a couple of weeks, they were given the all clear, though an interesting development occurred along the way. Crew member Deke Slayton discovered he had a lesion in his chest. However, it was benign and something that appeared to have been inside his body before the spaceflight. The lesion was taken out, and Slayton found himself in the surprising position of being diagnosed thanks to a space accident. Number 4. Soyuz 11 Reentry. Another crew who weren't so lucky died whilst re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, making them the first astronauts to lose their lives in space in 1971. Their names are Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, and they were aboard the Soviet Soyuz 11, which went up the Salyut 1, the world's first space station. There was a lot of responsibility on the three men. They were to spend 3 weeks there, taking part in the longest mission of its type ever attempted. The pressure was also on because they'd replaced the astronauts who were originally due to go up. Possible TB symptoms in one of the crew led them to being stood down, though frustratingly this turned out to be a false alarm. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev then blasted off to the station. They may have been backups, but the men still had an impressive track record. Not only was Volkov the first journalist in space, but Patsayev had a birthday, which would be the first celebrated amongst the stars. Whilst up there, the Soyuz 11 team took pictures, grew veggies, and became a talking point. A TV show featured them, and they became household names. Then, they made their return journey home, which ended both dramatically and tragically. When they jettisoned their modules, a valve broke and the crew experienced a rapid drop in air pressure. They were reportedly 100 miles from the ground, and while they tried to save themselves, the situation moved too fast. It's stated they passed out from lack of oxygen within a couple of minutes. When the Soyuz 11 capsule was found by Mission Control, the atmosphere was tense. Knocking on the side of the capsule, the team were worried as they received no response. They opened the door and discovered all three had perished. Blood had leaked from their noses and ears, plus their faces were covered in blue spots. The spots were because of the absence of oxygen in the blood. Measures were taken in the wake of the accident, from using stronger valves to the wearing of pressure suits. Authorities were determined to prevent such tragedies from happening in the future. Number 3. Vostok 1. A similar re-entry catastrophe was averted a decade earlier in 1961, though legendary Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin had the elements to thank for being saved from disaster. This groundbreaking, rather sky-splitting achievement belonged to the Soviets, though it very nearly ended badly for Gagarin. Vostok 1 took Gagarin into orbit for a full circuit of the planet. This made him the first human to orbit the Earth. He was around 105 miles up. For close to 2 hours after blastoff, he saw a sight no one before him had seen. In order to get back, he needed to re-enter the atmosphere and detach the service module from the re-entry module he sat in. How this worked was a bundle of wires that connected the two modules had to burn through. Now, it was thought to take 10 seconds for this to happen. Unfortunately for Gagarin, those wires proved surprisingly resilient. As he plunged back down to Earth, he had a surprising and rather heavy co-passenger that greatly affected the trajectory. The Vostok 1 module reportedly gyrated in dramatic fashion. A nickname for this module was Little Ball. Gagarin may have found this pretty appropriate, given he was probably being bounced around on the way down. A whole 9 minutes and 50 seconds later, the wires were broken and the service module detached. Gagarin ejected from the little ball and parachuted down. famously landing near a farmer and her granddaughter, who were, not surprisingly, pretty freaked out. Yuri Gagarin sadly lost his life in a plane crash in 1968. Following his space-age triumph, he was known across the world. However, the tragedy involving Soyuz 1 and Vladimir Komarov, which we mentioned earlier, and which Gagarin was involved in, led him to being prevented from going to space again. He only went beyond the stars once, but it was one heck of a ride. We're sure you'll agree. Number 2. Columbia Disaster. The Challenger disaster of 1986, where a NASA space shuttle broke apart on its way up into space, loomed large in people's memories, 17 years on, when the shuttle Columbia suffered the same fate. This time, however, it happened on Reentry, when people were hoping the 7-strong crew would make it back home. That said, the damage which led to the accident happened during launch, making events even more tragic. Columbia's left wing sustained a blow from foam insulation that broke away during the outward trip. The foam hit tiles on the wing, which were part of the thermal protection system. This system enables the shuttle to withstand the extreme temperatures, leaving the planet and up in space. In its compromised state, the left wing and the heat shield allowed in gas that eventually destroyed the craft on its way back. Everyone on board lost their lives, including Kalpana Chawla, who was the first Indian woman to travel into space. She was also the second Indian in space, and the first Indian-American woman to journey beyond our atmosphere. The loss of this inspirational figure, not to mention her colleagues, was immeasurable. It's a testament to the bravery of the world's astronauts that they risk their lives, even though they ultimately follow their dreams. Number 1. Apollo 13. This final entry is no doubt the most famous on our lineup. We've all heard of the Apollo 13 movie with Tom Hanks, right? And we all surely know it was a true story. Well, here's that story from 1970, which is a little shorter than how they tell it on the big screen, of course. The accident was a powerful explosion from one of the oxygen tanks, caused by a modification from its previous use in Apollo 10. During the modification process, a part called the internal fill line was jarred. So when safety testing was carried out, a dangerous chain of events was unwittingly set in motion. When it was noticed that the tank wasn't emptying, possibly due to the fill line, the decision was made to boil the oxygen away via the heaters, and this in turn damaged internal wiring. When the crew, James A. Lovell, John L. Swigert Jr., and Fred W. Hayes Jr., got up into space, their aim was to set foot on the moon. That went by the wayside spectacularly at a reported 56 hours into the mission, when the offending tank in the service module blew up. The explosion was so severe that the astronauts could actually see inside the module from their position in the command module. Wires exposed by high temperatures used to burn off the excess oxygen shorted out, and fire ensued, leading to a buildup in pressure and then the blast. This then damaged the other oxygen tank, and the supply was rapidly drained from the craft. The 3 men then faced a terrifying journey back to Earth once the plan to reach the moon was abandoned. Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes ended up in the lunar module intended to set down on the moon's surface. Elements such as the propulsion system were compromised by the damage. The lunar module had to be repurposed, going from a 2-man environment good for 2 days to a 3-man environment good for 4 days. In this perilous situation, Apollo 13 went round the moon and back to Earth, thankfully without any loss of life. A truly incredible result, even if the mission was a disaster. Number 8. New Hampshire UFO sightings. Our first unexplained object sighting involves the legendary and below-the-radar organization Project Blue Book. This top-secret United States Air Force project had its own dramatic TV series recently. It is featured in other shows, books, and documentaries. They looked into strange sightings and phenomena, cataloging, and in some cases, debunking the evidence presented to them by witnesses across America. New Hampshire had its fair share of supposed UFOs, notably back in 1965. In particular, the experiences of 3 men around the town of Kensington, near Exeter, grabbed attention. The first individual was Norman Muscarello, a high school graduate who was about to join the Navy. Traveling on foot along Route 150 in the month of September, he was going from Amesbury, where his girlfriend lived, to his home in Exeter, a distance of 10 miles which Muscarello would hitchhike. It was 2 a.m. and Muscarello reportedly spent most of the journey that night walking due to a lack of traffic. hitting Kensington. He then observed 5 red lights flashing on and off in the sky. They appeared to be coming from a large hovering object, which seemed to spot Muscarello and fly towards him. After hiding in a ditch, the young man frantically tried to get help before flagging down a car. Muscarello was driven to the local police station where he reported what he'd seen. Earlier, Officer Eugene Bertrand of the local force had been talking to a disturbed lady in her car. She'd claimed to see the red lights as well. Officer Bertrand thought little of it till word came in about Muscarello. He then took the young man to the location where he'd seen the lights. They witnessed a large object rise into the air, accompanied by the now notorious light show. The object moved in a swaying motion, the lights moving from left to right and back again. At one point, Officer Bertrand was going to try and shoot at it. Ultimately, he called for assistance in the shape of Officer David Hunt. He too witnessed the strange sight before this UFO went on its way. Despite explanations from authorities, including that the lights came from an Air Force base, which was clearly not the case, the multiple reports of hovering lights in the area suggested this was something not of our Earth. As for Project Blue Book, they speculated that the sightings were down to a training mission. Fast forward to 2011, and the Skeptical Inquirer published another explanation that the red lights emanated from a Boeing KC-97 Stratofreighter. Not sure we're convinced about that. Number 7. UFOs interrupt football match. We've all seen pitch invasions during a football match, right? Everyone from disgruntled fans to naked streakers. But this story is different because it involves unidentified flying objects. The sighting happened at a stadium in Florence, Italy in 1954. And what's more, took place in front of 10,000 people. During a Fiorentina versus Pistoiese game, objects appeared in the sky over the Stadio Artemi Franchi. These have been described as like eggs, balls, or cigars, so a definitive shape hasn't been established. Also, some say the objects move slow, and others say they were fast. One curious detail is the stuff that came out of the UFOs. Crowds and players saw a white, woolly, sticky material float down. It is often referred to as angel hair and sadly evaporated soon after landing. People have suggested spider webs as an explanation. Come again? Yeah, they claim the angel hair is actually part of a sail-like structure used to transport spiders through the air during a migration. Whatever it was, the material was released all over Tuscany, and there were other sightings of weird objects in the sky. It's reported that some of the angel hair was studied, and the elements don't match up with that of spider webs. Which is reassuring. Think we'd prefer it to be aliens rather than creepy crawlies, not gonna lie. Number 6. Scottish UFO attack. This next entry is truly remarkable because it's the first ever case of a UFO sighting that was investigated by the cops. Are we talking some alien hunting branch of the police here? Well, no, not exactly. What actually happened was the poor man who saw the object was, it seems, assaulted in a bizarre incident that took place in the area of Deckman Law in West Lothian County, Scotland. It was serious enough for the case to be treated as assault. The time was 1979. Forester Bob Taylor was out with his dog when he ran into what he described as a dark metallic dome in the air. Surrounded by small propellers, it was apparently over 20 feet and accompanied by a bad smell, which Taylor compared to burning brakes. If this wasn't alarming enough, Taylor said he was then attacked by smaller floating objects, which tried to take him forcibly to the UFO. After passing out, he woke up to find himself with ragged clothing and grazes on his chin and thigh. We're not sure what happened to the dog. Hopefully it was okay. But Taylor went home and reported the dramatic scenario. A return visit to the site by authorities revealed odd markings on the ground. So what went down in this unlikely place? Did Taylor suffer an epileptic fit that caused him to hallucinate? Or a stroke? Could PVC piping used by the waterworks have left the ladder-shaped marks on the ground as has been suggested? Guess we'll never know. Also, we're assuming the assault investigation went nowhere, unless some little green men were taken back to the station only for the Scottish branch of Men in Black to show up and wipe everyone's memories. If that detail was forgotten, then Bob Taylor's name wasn't. He remains an iconic figure in the field of ufology, albeit an accidental one. Number 5. Robert Matthews. We mentioned before about the Men in Black wiping people's memories. Obviously, that was a joke. but we should maybe be treating the subject of alien-related memory loss more seriously, especially when it's the aliens that are doing the erasing. This is what's believed to have happened to Robert Matthews in 1966. He experienced a well-documented phenomenon called missing time. Back when he was 19 and about to tour with the Air Force as a first-class airman, Matthews was supposed to have been picked up and taken to his base from a bus stop in North Truro, a village in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He reportedly had a bad feeling that morning, one that wasn't helped by his transport not showing up. After calling the base, he was told to wait a bit longer. Lights in the sky led to Matthews' nervous feelings getting worse and worse. He went to phone the base again, asking where his lift had gotten to. To his surprise, they revealed the truck had reached the bus stop, but they hadn't seen him. Matthews assured them he'd been in position the whole time. However, he got another jolt when looking at his watch. An hour had passed, seemingly in a matter of minutes. He then had to report to his superiors and go over what happened. Talk about an awkward explanation. Naturally, they figured he was jerking them around. Boy, Matthews' career serving his country had gotten off to a weird start, right? Everyone moved on, though he knew something had happened to him during this missing time. He had brief flashbacks to a medical-type environment and being watched by people. At least, he probably figured there were people. Reading a book by Bud Hopkins, the ufologist convinced Matthews that his eerie experiences were valid. Not only did Hopkins write about the idea of missing time, he ran support groups for those affected by it. Matthews went under hypnosis, where he relieved the bus stop incident in greater detail. His unlocked mind remembered a ship landing and 3 aliens taking him on board, where he was examined. And there was a further twist. Turns out Matthews had also seen an alien when he was a boy in his bedroom, so it wasn't his first rodeo when it came to close encounters. Whether you believe Matthews' story or not, you must admit it's crazy that so many people have described situations involving time that simply disappears. Number 4. Hogs Object. This looks like an exceptionally pretty object, doesn't it? It's also one of the most mysterious. The unexplained ring galaxy was first spotted by Arthur Hoag, an astronomer, back in 1950. So curious looking was the shape that it was assumed to be a trick of the light by some. Turns out not. This is what the galaxy actually looks like, and it's far more than just a galaxy. The outer ring is a galaxy, the round ball inside is a galaxy, and there's also an extra galaxy between them. Crazy, right? Ring galaxies make up a tiny fraction of overall galaxies seen through telescopes. Not only is Hogs Object rare in terms of these stats, it's also a one-off due to its beautiful and baffling appearance. The outer ring is comprised of blue stars, billions of them. The center is red and dense and made of stars. Maybe we should think of this thing as a donut with the gooey stuff in the center. Okay, that's making me hungry. So best we focus on the galaxy, wouldn't you say? Located 600 million light-years from us and measuring approximately 100,000 light-years in width, Hogs Object has been the subject of theories from experts, even though no one can say with certainty how it came to be. A galactic collision is one idea, with one galaxy crashing into another. Perhaps out of something chaotic emerged something truly special. Still, that's kind of the deal with the whole universe, isn't it? Number 3. What happened to the hills? While we're accustomed to hearing stories of unexplained object sightings, there was a time when such an incident was new and strange to the public. Where did it all begin for accounts of UFO abduction? That would be the case involving the hills. A couple named Betty and Barney makes us think of the Flintstones, but the details of this story are enough to take anything frivolous off your mind well and truly. Their run-in with a UFO happened in New Hampshire, 1961. They'd been married under a matter of months when they decided to go on a late honeymoon. Seems like they had a pleasant 3-day break before having to drive back to Portsmouth, where Barney worked for the post office and Betty for child welfare services. There was a potential problem in the shape of an oncoming hurricane. However, they drove through the night in order to beat it. That they did, yet they also encountered a storm neither of them could have predicted. Driving in the dark, they became aware of a bright light, which followed them with alarming accuracy through the country road network. After a while, the tension proved too much. Betty checked the light out with her binoculars and saw it was a rotating object. Then, Barney attempted to confront the object with a gun, though fell prey to some kind of mind control from the beings looking out of him from what happened to be a craft. Barney heard a voice, perhaps in his mind. The couple made the probably wise decision to run for it at this point. In a freaky move, their truck began bleeping before the pair lost consciousness. They made it home in the end, only with a reported 35 miles and 2 hours of their lives missing. Betty's dress was torn, and Barney's shoes had been through the wars. Intriguingly, both their watches had stopped. Remember how we mentioned missing time earlier? This was the original, and maybe the best account of such a phenomenon. As well as making headlines, the story featured elements we're now familiar with, including flying discs and gray-colored big-eyed aliens. It took time for the Hills to process what happened, but they recalled being examined on board the ship. They didn't have the honeymoon they expected, and were sure it's traumatic, but these two definitely went down in the history books. Number 2. UFO in Antarctica. Is this a UFO poking out from beneath what looks like a rocky outcropping in the frozen wastes of Antarctica? Eagle-eyed internet users certainly seem to think it is. Whatever it is, it's out of place in this landscape, right? The 66-foot wide object was first noticed in 2018 out in the Bunger Hills at Wilkes Island, part of the continent's eastern side. Adding to the intrigue is the supposed saucer's exact location. Speculation must have reached fever pitch with the news that the UFO, or rather, the unidentified sitting object, so USO is more appropriate we'd say, is close to a strange entrance-like structure. This leads into a rock face, suggesting to some that it's the secret gateway to some underground facility. Even more intriguing is that the UFO and the strange entrance have another noteworthy spot between them. Back in the early 1990s, Dale Anderson, an exobiologist working for a joint US-Russian project, was caught up in a blizzard and sought shelter. Slap bang between where the entranceway is and the alleged spaceship. Gives us chills, so to speak. Number 1. Alua Mua. Meet Alua Mua, which translates as Scout in Hawaiian. This is a very special asteroid. What's so cool about it? Well, how about the fact that it's the very first object we know about from another galaxy that's tumbled into ours. Cigar-shaped and constantly spinning, the chunk of rock is our most ancient visitor and was spotted for a total of 11 days at Pan-STARRS. That stands for the Panoramic Survey Telescope and Rapid Response System on the Big Island. We never got a proper look at it till 2017. Interesting, seeing as it's so old, right? But then, that's the view we get when it comes to the depths of our solar system. When we pick something up with a telescope, it's actually way back in the past. This is to do with the distance light has to travel, but anyway, that topic is probably a whole video in itself, right? As for the size of Alua Mua, well, you may be surprised. It's approximately 330 feet long maximum. That makes it even trickier to keep track of. Just as we're getting to know this relatively little fella, off he went. It was nice meeting you, even if on the whole, you're an unexplained knobbly lump. Number 8. Marie Curie's Apparatus. In the 1980s, a doctor was in attendance at the Mutter Museum, part of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. We don't exactly know why he was there, but it was a good job that he chose to be around. Why do we say that? Because he identified a source of potentially dangerous radioactivity on the premises. Where was this dangerous source located? The answer is possibly surprising. An exhibit donated by none other than legendary chemist and physicist Marie Curie. Crazy, huh? With her husband Pierre, she took part in groundbreaking experiments that helped reveal the presence of radiation and its benefits to the world. By 1921, Marie was alone, Pierre having passed away years before. She was touring the United States and decided that the couple's piezoelectric apparatus would make a nice gift. Piezoelectric refers to material that makes a charge when put under stress by a machine. If that sounds a little complicated, then the explanation behind the actual device is more straightforward. It was the first ever measuring instrument for radioactivity. Now we mentioned the apparatus was donated to the college in the 1920s. What did this 1980s physician do that was so noteworthy? Well, he asked if the Curies' invention had been tested for radiation. Turns out, no, it hadn't. Crazy how this little detail didn't occur to people here. But then, in fairness, the Curies themselves didn't understand the damage radiation could do till later. Also, the apparatus had been in a case which probably protected people, but anyway, the revelation caused concern, and rightly so. Thanks for the gift, Marie. If only we'd bought you something. A block of uranium, perhaps? Number 7. Victorian Wallpaper. No, you're not hallucinating. Wallpaper? Damn straight. Wallpaper can be very dangerous. At least it was back in history. And you know what? If you had wallpaper which contained arsenic as an ingredient in your home, you may have well started hallucinating. During Victorian times in the 19th century, people liked having garish, elaborate-looking paper on the walls. All very striking until you find out what's in the green and yellow coloring. In the case of Sheila's green, for example, the invention of a chemist with the same name, copper arsenite was used to give the required effect. The wallpaper manufacturer, William Morris, had arsenic-infused designs in his home, so it was seen as pretty fashionable. He figured everything was fine, and that stories of customers growing sick and dying were connected to something else. What he didn't understand was that the arsenic was being released in various ways and getting into people's bodies. For example, the color would flake away and be drawn into someone's lungs, or if the conditions were right, vapors were produced. Morris hadn't seen anyone expire in his home, adding to his skepticism. But what he maybe didn't realize was that the young and the aged were the victims. Other age groups could cope with it, though it ain't exactly something you want in your respiratory system, right? By the late 1860s, the problem had been exposed and arsenic was taken out of household wallpaper. It had taken a surprisingly lengthy amount of time for the situation to be acknowledged, with warnings going out well before production was stopped. We should add that arsenic was used by Victorians in cosmetic products and even food, so maybe it wasn't a shock that it all went under the radar. Number 6. Lawn darts. Some childhood games made sense at the time, even if they turned out to be highly dangerous. As well as the rough and tumble of the playground, you could enjoy hazardous activity within the confines of your own home. Lawn darts capture this mood of excitement and danger perfectly. Looking at them now in their original form, it's amazing they got off the drawing board, really. Wouldn't you say? People sure enjoyed playing with them, and they're iconic in their way. However, they also gained a nasty reputation for seriously injuring human beings. Measuring approximately 1 foot, lawn darts were held by the stem and thrown through the air. The heavier and, most importantly, pointed end would find its mark via the power of gravity. That mark was supposed to be a lawn, though sometimes it hit someone's body. The darts had around 4 decades of success before being taken off shelves in 1988 once the dangers became increasingly apparent. The darts, or jarts, were out of people's lives. Well, that's not quite accurate. The ones that got purchased over the years were still used. This led the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, to repeat its warning to the public after the original ban. The tips could be made from either plastic or metal, but the product was dangerous either way. Also, we should add you can still buy lawn darts, only ones with a safer design. These are blunted rather than pointed. They look like they could give you a good bump on the head, to be honest, but hey, at least they aren't killing people anymore, right? Number 5. Cosmos 954. While space travel is often accompanied by a sense of wonder from the public, we'd bet a lot of money that most people don't know what kind of stuff goes into these incredible space launches. If they knew a bit more, they might stay home rather than gather in crowds to check out the cosmic action. Some things that go up are on the dangerous side, and guess what? They come down. And when that happens, all manner of chaos can ensue. A good example of this is Cosmos 954, which was part of the Soviet Rorsat program in 1977. Designed to look down on the oceans from space, this reconnaissance satellite blasted off with a nuclear reactor on board. Excuse me? A nuclear payload over everyone's head as it shoots up into the sky? Yeah, that's how they do it. Anyhow, it's pretty safe, right? The idea is the reactor detaches from the satellite and is ditched amongst the stars for ET to worry about. In this case, however, that did not happen, and it stayed very much connected to the Cosmos 954. On re-entry, the satellite broke apart and dangerous debris landed on the north of Canada. Beyond awkward. So what happens in a crazy situation like that? Well, Canada had to clean up the mess, though ultimately the bill went to the Kremlin. Several years before Cosmos launch, something called the Space Liability Convention was brought in. Russia was clearly to blame, right? No contest. The Canadians launched Operation Morning Light to remove the debris. It cost them a reported $6 million. For whatever reason, the Soviets didn't stump up all the dough. They only paid half, which sure adds insult to injury, huh? As we said, going into space can be awe-inspiring and wonderful, yet it can be also messy and expensive. Number 4. Backdoor CIA Toolkit. Working for the intelligence services often requires agents to display total dedication to their country. In America, you have the CIA, of course, and they arguably put their operatives through more punishment than most. Check out this pill-shaped object, which was an important piece of an agent's kit. Question is, where do you stick it? In your pocket? Well, maybe, but it'll be a little obvious in there. Can't risk it going in your bag. You know what? You should put it in the place it was designed for, inside your body. And we're sure you probably worked out where it is by now. If you haven't, well, this is a family channel. Basically, it's going somewhere where the sun doesn't shine too much. While you get your head around that idea, let's talk about what this thing actually does. It's a container in which you'd find tools. What kind of tools? Well, you'd probably wince, but knives, saws, drill bits. If you ever get in a tight spot, you'd simply pop the case out and access what you needed to extract yourself from trouble. We're not sure if this potentially dangerous toolkit is still being used today. Even if we knew, we couldn't tell you. Our lips are sealed. It's certainly a relic of the past and can reportedly be seen at Washington, D.C.'s International Spy Museum. Guessing this is one exhibit people aren't keen on holding in their hands. Number 3. Deadly chemistry sets. While the name chemistry set may not mean much to the younger generation of today, they were a big deal back in the 20th century. If you were a kid back then, you could actually handle the materials you might find in a real-life chemistry lab, and manufacturers did not skimp on the detail, as you're about to discover. As well as Bunsen burners and old-school glass test tubes, you open the box to find such delights as sulfuric acid, poisons, chlorine gas ingredients, stuff you can make meth with, and even uranium. Come again? Yep. For the full atomic educational experience you really needed to handle radioactive material. I mean, the enclosed Geiger counter should help your little ones avoid any mishaps. Right? Right? So why were children behind exposed to hazardous chemicals which were on sale in all good toy shops? The answer was pretty serious. Chemistry was seen as a great job option for boys. Starting in 1914, chemistry sets were made available for them to give the role a try. And if you're wondering where girls fit into this equation, they got their own sets, but these didn't hit shelves until the 1950s, long after the Second World War had altered perceptions about what women could do. By the 1960s, people were getting jumpy about these exciting yet injury-causing playsets. It was clear that the business of an activity such as building batteries was practical for young minds, but it was also far from a game. With the dangers too big to ignore, the situation became a lot less explosive. As in literally. Mom and dad could breathe a sigh of relief as their pride and joy didn't have to be watched all the time in case they burned a hole in the carpet or worse. Number 2. Operation Tumbler Snapper. Ask anyone what presents the greatest danger to humanity, and a fair number of people would respond with the answer, nuclear weapons. The USA, for example, is primed to defend itself against nukes from other countries. And of course, to defend against nukes, you have to have your own nukes. A nuclear weapon is a mind-blowingly powerful part of any nation's arsenal, and its harmful effects have been witnessed across the globe. It's seen as a last resort, and with good reason. You drop a bomb, and it can irradiate the environment for generations. One of the most chilling aspects of going nuclear, it seems to us, is that nuclear weapons are just like other weapons. How so? Well, like other weapons, they need to be tested. How do you go about testing a devastating weapon of this kind? In the case of America, it had to do that on home turf, specifically a famous, or should that be infamous, test site at Nye County in Nevada. You'd think that the middle of a desert would be the perfect location to set off a nuke, but consider this. The site is approximately 65 miles away from Las Vegas, a populated area that isn't too far away, at least as far as a nuclear blast is concerned. In 1952, some tests were conducted under the bizarre name of Operation Tumbler Snapper. This referred to the two phases of the test. For Tumbler, there were 3 airdrops. Snapper consisted of just 1 drop, but with 4 of what are known as tower shots. These towers can be glimpsed in photographic evidence from the tests. Check out this eerily beautiful, but also horrifying image of a device detonation. In total, over 1,000 tests of this nature were carried out, and the people these weapons were intended to protect wound up contaminated in some cases. There's just no safe way of doing this kind of thing, it seems, which makes it incredibly dangerous. Number 1. The elephant's foot. What exactly are we looking at here? It looks like a weird, blurry, blobby, column-shaped object. No wonder they refer to this thing as the elephant's foot. It wouldn't look out of place on Dumbo. Mind you, if Dumbo was near this thing, they'd be dead pretty soon. Sorry for the nightmarish image, but we're just trying to underline how truly dangerous this elephant's foot actually is. It's actually regarded as the most dangerous thing on the planet. By now, you're probably desperate to know what it is. Well, if we reveal its location, you'll get a good idea. You see, the elephant's foot is to be found in Ukraine, in the notorious area of Chernobyl, the town that made headlines when its nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic meltdown in 1986. And it comes as no surprise to hear that you can't just go in and sweep away the remains of the planet's worst nuclear disaster. The elephant's foot is a concentrated mass of nuclear material, plus other stuff such as concrete that tried to contain it but failed spectacularly. The mixture simply isn't suitable for being anywhere near human beings. Those brave enough to get reasonably close are clad in protective suits. They tried taking pictures, and the radiation is so powerful, it messes with the image quality. What might happen if you were unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity of the elephant's foot? Nothing good, that's for sure. In fact, you whittle down your life expectancy to an incredible 2 days by being in its presence for as little as 5 minutes. The most worrying thing about this super dangerous object is there isn't much authorities can do about it. Just leave it alone. There isn't a substance tough enough to make something seal it in. People are praying the Chernobyl environment is enough to hold this thing in check until the radiation subsides. How long will that be? Oh, only around 100,000 years. So it looks like the elephant's foot is going to take a while to burn out before some other terrible threat takes its place. Cheery thought, right? Thanks for watching. Are there any totally dangerous objects you think should have been on the list? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe and see you soon.